Posted by you/non. Serious, what are some of the creepiest/most terrifying missing persons cases? The disappearance of Lars Mittag. Lars Mittag started acting strangely after getting into a fight while on vacation in Bulgaria. During the fight he damaged his eardrum and was taking antibiotics, although there are no known side effects of the antibiotics he was on that would explain his behavioral change. Due to his damaged eardrum he stayed behind after his friends left so he would have a few days to heal and a doctor could re-examine his ear before getting onto the plane. Once he was alone in Bulgaria his odd behavior was exacerbated. He began texting his family saying he wasn't safe and they needed to cancel his credit card. When he arrived at the airport to fly home he went to first see a doctor to get approved to fly with his injury. Apparently there was a doctor's office in the airport. While waiting to be seen he bolted out of the airport at full sprint, never to be seen again. Edit, footage from when he was last seen. The German Wikipedia site is a lot more informative and gives more details. Among other things, it says that Lars's friends reported that he had eaten notably little food during their whole vacation, often saying that he wasn't hungry. He also stayed out on his own the night before his friend's departure, and that's when he, as he later told his friends, got in a fight with some other Germans over soccer teams, and they supposedly hired some Russians to beat him up. That's apparently when his eardrum got ruptured, too. With all this, I wonder, without having any basis in fact though, if he might have been on the verge of a psychotic episode. Early warning signs for that can be, among others, unusual behavior, changes in eating and sleeping habits, aggressiveness, and delusions. Could fit him ho. Edit, here's a very detailed English language article for those of you who are interested. Kudos to you/Dragonfly Girl for finding it. My theory is that hearing people speaking to him in Bulgarian was a trigger for whatever mental issue/paranoia he was going through. I thought I read it was Bulgarians, not Russians that beat him up, and he claimed they were hired by the Germans from the sports bar, but if it was just some random drunk Bulgarians who said something to him, that could have triggered a paranoid episode where he started to act violent and that's what earned him the hit on the ear. He also made the paranoid texts and calls to his mom from the motel he stayed at after his friends left. I wouldn't be surprised if he heard people talking in the hall, in adjacent rooms, or just someone said something to him as he was going to his room in Bulgarian and that started another episode. Then, we know from the doctor that the last thing that happened before Lars ran out of the airport was that a colleague of his poked his head into the exam room where Lars was being examined and spoke to the doctor in Bulgarian. Immediately after Lars started to get nervous and it culminated with sprinting out like we see in the security tape. Though it ultimately doesn't matter what triggered it on the surface, I can't help but notice the common theme here. I think the important thing is that it points to some kind of repeated behavior of burgeoning paranoia. In 2006 an Austrian man named Wolfgang Picklopile committed suicide by throwing himself in front of a train near his home in Vienna. His captive of 8 years had escaped from him that day. The victim had been locked in a cellar in his home. When she broke free she quickly found assistance. The abduction had been widely publicized. Police had been pursuing the wrong types of clues because they had no expectation she was still alive. 2 years later in Amstetten, Austria, an even more tragic case surfaced. A woman told police she had recently escaped from a cellar where she had been held captive for 24 years. Her captor was her father, Joseph Fritzl. He had begun abusing her sexually when she was 11 years old. During her teens her father knocked her unconscious and then imprisoned her in the cellar. Fritzl fathered 7 children through rape during the captivity, 3 of whom he raised, claiming they were foundlings, 3 grew up in the cellar with their mother, and 1 he incinerated shortly after birth. Police closed the search for the missing teen after a brief inquiry because Fritzl presented them with a letter he coerced her into writing which claimed she was staying with friends in another city, and he claimed that she had joined a religious cult. It can happen anywhere. Oh, I am so fascinated with the Fritzl one. I think I heard that one on That's Why We Drink. He built this entire secret basement and told her and the kids that the door could electrocute them. Some of her kids got to live regular lives as her mother's children, and others had to live in the secret basement. They were really malnourished, and I think one of the kids got sick, and eventually she convinced him to take the kid to the hospital, and somehow through that they were discovered, but it was still a clusterfuck of no one believing she and the kids were prisoners for a while. She was at odds with her mother for a time too, but she eventually forgave her. My cousin went missing for about 2 to 3 months when she was 12 years old. She was walking home from school and stopped by a store to buy something to drink. A man stood beside her and started talking her. She never made any contact with him and never answered his questions. When she got out of the store and walked fast, when the guy went behind her and covered her mouth, he then went to a corner and gut punched her. He took her into a hidden house in the south of our city. He then sexually assaulted her multiple times. At that time no one knew where she was, and no one found a body where she was last seen. After a month, the police eventually pronounced her dead. After a couple of months, someone told the police about the hidden house they saw when they heard screaming and sobbing inside. She was found and the suspect was jailed. This isn't probably creepy, but it was really terrifying for my cousin. She is 20 now and still in therapy. The Zachary Ramsey disappearance / the case of Nathaniel Barjona. The police were never able to find his body, but there was strong evidence that Barjona kidnapped him. There is also pretty substantial evidence that he may have actually eaten the boy after the police found recipes like little boy pot pie in a journal. I know the twin sisters who were the last ones to see Zachary because they walked part way with him, and they believe that he was taken on his way to school. Edit, just to add, I mentioned to my mom that I had posted on this subreddit, and she told me my aunt's house, which we subsequently took over after her death for a time, was just right down the road from Barjona's mom's house. Edit number 2, I spoke with New York grandmother about this case as well, and she mentioned to me that a lot of people in town didn't think he could be the suspect / a criminal because of his weight. A lot of people thought that you had to be rather fit or have a high stamina to be a serial killer. Also, a lot of people didn't think he could be the rapist because of the stigma that obese people have no inherent sexual desires. It wasn't until evidence of other murdered children were found in his home, and as well as all the other creepy stuff. Susan Powell. The whole story is so sad. They know who, vaguely how, but will probably never locate her. The whole family simply comes apart, and it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. What happened to her boys is absolutely unconscionable. Susan Powell married Josh Powell at 19. Their relationship deteriorated fast. Josh's dad was a pervert and fell madly in love with Susan. It didn't help that Susan was the only one making money multiple times in their marriage, while Josh took that money and barely let her spend it. This was not the only sign of domestic abuse in the household. Josh spent so much that he racked up over $100K in debt. He declared bankruptcy. Josh's dad confessed his obsession with Susan, and even though Susan was absolutely disgusted, thought she was leading him on. Several years into their marriage, Josh refused to even kiss or hold his wife's hand, claiming that when he kissed her he got sick. Despite this, they had 2 children, Charlie and Braden. Susan talked at work about how she was most likely going to divorce Josh but was afraid of the legal process. Josh also threatened her. Eventually, on December 6, 2009, Josh claimed that he took the boys on a camping trip the night before despite a huge snowstorm. After this, it was quite obvious Josh murdered Susan. Later, was a fight of custody of the 2 boys between Susan's parents and Josh. Josh's dad was arrested for child pornography. When Josh lost custody of the children, he still had visitation status. The children were brought over to his house for a supervised visit with a social worker. Josh slammed the door on the social worker and locked it. The social worker recalled smelling gasoline and called 911. This did nothing. Josh blew up the house, killing himself and the boys in the process. In the aftermath, Josh's brother Michael also commits suicide via jumping off a building. Even after all this, Susan's body was never found.